This week, we're going to discuss likely one of the most contentious topics in sport financing over the past 20 years, the idea of sport facility investments and construction. Public opinion is divided on the public subsidy for sport facilities. From 1997 onward, almost 40% of the public referendum dollars proposed to subsidize sport facilities were rejected, but over 60% of those proposals were actually approved. These approvals suggest that a majority of residents perceive the benefits that accrue from facilities to sufficiently outweigh the opportunity costs and equity issues that opponents have raised. Nevertheless, ascertaining the cost of constructing a major sport facility is not simple. In addition to the cost of the facility itself, there are likely other costs, such as opportunity cost, the cost of infrastructure, such as roads, utilities, parking, and the cost of relocating existing residents or business. Decisions have to be made as to which of these ancillary costs and what proportion of them should be included in the calculation of the total facility's cost. Facility construction couldn't begin without a subsidy. A subsidy is the amount of money that government entities fund for acquisition of the site and other public works, essentially financial aid given by the government to individuals or smaller individual groups. Two types of subsidies that are critical to our investigation today are infrastructure and operating subsidies. In many cases, the government needs to improve the public transport or other infrastructural items. This can therefore be done by subsidizing those transit agencies that provide the public services so that the services can be affordable for everyone. This is the best way of helping different groups of disabled and low-income families in the society, for example, roads, police, fire, and safety. Operating subsidies are sources of revenue foregone by the government entities they would have normally be expected to receive, such as rents, concessions, parking, signage revenue, and property taxes. Ultimately, decisions have to be made whether or not to include such ancillary costs in the cost of construction. Items such as land, roads, utilities, parking, relocation of other businesses and residents, and opportunity cost, which is the value of the best alternative not taken when a decision to expend government money is made. When you spend money on one thing, you give up the opportunity to spend it on another. Other costs, such as inflation, which are the gradual rising of prices over time, inflation rate, the percentage that prices will rise, and the CC, or Cost Construction Index, is based on the national average. The lineage of facility construction can be traced through four main eras, the first of which is the gestation era between 1961 and 1969. This was post-World War II, when very little money existed to build or refurbish new parks. Building financing was difficult due to the high-priced land and the need for a lot of it. Local governments essentially became landlords, lease agreements were strict, specified rents were very high, and they shared a large portion of parking and concessions. The second such era is the public subsidy era, from 1970 to 1984. During this time, sport popularity grew, venue attendance increased exponentially, and so did television viewership. Franchise values increased during this time, and funding expectations were set. The reason it's called the public subsidy era is because the public largely footed the bill for a lot of these stadiums. This is considered the most active period of expansion and relocation in modern sport history, and local and state governments contributed 93% of the developmental costs for major sport venues in the U.S. and Canada. The transitional era is referred to as such because governments during this time assumed a diminishing role in the financing of major new sport facilities. Two acts were responsible for this: the Deficit Reduction Act of 1984, which prohibited the use of tax-exempt bonds to finance luxury boxes, and the Tax Reform Act of 1986. This act stated that local governments no longer had the right to issue tax-exempt bonds to finance the construction of sport facilities if more than 10% of the stadium's useful service was consumed by private business, or more than 10% of the principal and interest payments came directly or indirectly from sport franchise revenues. This first provision is called the business use test. Most sport pro teams use or occupy more than 10% of a facility's scheduled capacity per year. If one organization has preferential treatment that exceeds 10% of the facility's use, then the business use test is violated and the bonds do not qualify for an exemption. The transitional era ultimately led to a new way in which partnerships were viewed, particularly from the public and private side. This abated taxpayer resistance to high-price projects, and it became a good upfront investment for the teams. This also provided a great deal of corporate association. Generous lease agreements were the norm at this time, generating revenues from luxury suites, concessions, parking, and sponsorship agreements. This public-private partnership idea ultimately led to the fully loaded era in sport popularity. During this time, 47 new facilities were constructed, approximately 45% of the total facilities that actually existed. Destination venues became the norm, which maximized revenues and became commercially obsolete. Single sport venues also started to pop up exponentially, and owners contributed about 38% of the capital as opposed to 15% from the mid to late 80s. This new public-private partnership model spawned the need for new and innovative ways in order to raise quick capital to build facilities and construct arenas. One of the ways in which they did this was through conducting a bond campaign. And a bond is an interest-only loan, also called a certificate of debt, that is issued by a government or corporation in order to raise money. The issuer is required to pay a fixed sum annually until maturity, and then a fixed sum to repay the principal. Although the challenge of convincing voters to raise their property taxes in support of new facilities might be a daunting one, a well-orchestrated campaign to educate residents as to the actual costs and actual benefits associated with the project can lead to favorable outcomes. This is particularly true for smaller projects that are perceived to provide a widespread public benefit. Marketing theory offers two key concepts that are central for an effective campaign to pass a bond referendum. The first is the idea of market segmentation, which recognizes that residents are likely to have similar perceptions, attitudes, and interests towards sport facilities. The second idea focuses on the benefit principle. This involves addressing the question of what's in it for me or what's in it for them. Two types of bonds were really the norm during this time. First is a general obligation bond, also called a GO bond, or a full faith bond. The reason they're referred to full faith is because they were guaranteed repayment. These bonds come with low interest, low risk, and tend to be tied to property taxes. The second is a revenue bond. These are particularly appropriate when a new facility is capable of generating enough revenue to pay for its own operations and any debt obligations incurred during its construction. Because revenue bonds are repaid from income produced by the facility and not from property or sales tax, no referendum is required. Some of the sources for public sector funding came in the form of taxes, the first of which is called a hard tax. They're called hard taxes for two main reasons. The burden of payment falls on all or most of the taxpayers in the jurisdiction, and second, these taxes are harder to implement because they require voter approval, hence the moniker hard. It is challenging to fund stadiums with these taxes because many states have placed limits on overall local spending, property tax revenue growth, and property assessment values. General property tax is the backbone of local government finance. More than 96% of property tax revenues go to the local government. The tax base is the aggregate value of all assessed property within a particular jurisdiction. The tax rate, on the other hand, is once the tax base has been determined by the assessment of the local government, they then set the tax rate to meet its needs. The local government uses this money to fill holes in their budget. General sales tax is the largest source of state income tax revenue, around the approximate 3 to 10%. Soft taxes are referred to as such because they're easier to levy, as they only constitute a small portion of the taxpayers, and largely they're targeted towards out-of-towners in the forms of lodging, food, and drink. A couple of these taxes are tourist development, hotel-motel, car rental, sin taxes, and player tax. Tourist development taxes are implemented in two main ways: the cost of occupying a motel or hotel room and the cost of renting a car. The hotel-motel tax is just an additional percentage tacked onto your room. A car rental tax, same thing, approximately 8% nationally. Sin taxes are in the form of alcohol and cigarettes. One of the most notable examples of funding a project through sin taxes is Jacobs Field in Cleveland. And a player tax are taxes paid by visiting team players or the home team if the player resides in another state. The trend for dramatic investment increases in facilities extends beyond the major league to the minor leagues and collegiate facilities. Two stimuli have driven these increases. Number one, a resurgence of interest in the minor leagues, and number two, Major League Baseball's adoption of a comprehensive set of stadium specifications aimed at raising the standards and amenities. The prevailing argument is that there are more revenue opportunities for larger market teams, especially in the Major League, than smaller market ones, thereby requiring more public funds to facilitate their operations. Relocation also becomes an issue. These minor league teams have no specific ties to the town they are in. They will go wherever the best deal is and the most money is given. In college sport, the growing trend to improve and build brand new stadiums and enhance existing ones is referred to as the athletic arms race. This is done to attract the best talent for recruiting purposes, and most colleges don't want to rebuild, they want to renovate. The big push for luxury seating has been the norm, and this is made viable by bowl games and booster donations. You may or may not recall from our economics discussion that scarcity of resources is among one of the main issues prevalent when talking about an economic viability of a sport entity, or other entity for that matter. Remember that scarcity of resources is one of the most basic concepts in economics, and obviously one of the most scarce resources is cash. Scarcity in this context necessitates trade-offs, and trade-offs result in the opportunity cost, or the value of the best alternative not taken when a decision is made. When you spend money on one thing, you give up the opportunity to spend it on another. Essentially, it's a cost-benefit analysis of choices. You can build schools, roads, healthcare, transportation, incentives to attract other businesses, or you can finance a sport facility or arena. Some of the applications for opportunity cost are in the form of consumer choice, production possibilities, the cost of capital, time management, career choice, and the analysis of any comparable advantages. The two main opportunity costs come in the form of capital investments and operational budgets. Capital investments are simply the money used for construction. Operational budgets, however, are money used for people in the community to fund healthcare, safety, police, etc. While there are many reasons for government officials spending on stadiums and other large construction projects, among the highest is the idea of visibility. These construction projects generate a large amount of visibility in the community and therefore can be tied to the tenure of that government official. Increased operating budgets are tied to a referendum and can be criticized. However, the money can go towards the people in the community, so they have a say in how it's spent. Again, operating budgets are ongoing, whereas capital investments are limited to one time period. Operating budgets, increasing that, could produce an enhanced image for that government official over time. And capital investments are tied to non-city residents, whereas operational are tied to local residents' taxpayer money. There's tend to be a very slight economic return or economic impact on some of these stadiums and facilities, but we'll talk about that later. In terms of the equity issue for opportunity cost, we beg the questions: who wins and who loses, and who pays and who benefits? Well, the demographic groups oftentimes stand to lose the most from public projects, such as the poor and the minorities, due to relocation and increased property values around the stadium. Public subsidies transfer income from ordinary people to high-priced owners, executives, and players. So the taxpayers pay, the high-priced owners, executives, and players tend to benefit, thereby leading to what's referred to as an economic disconnect between the taxpayer and the franchise. As of late, you may have noticed great momentum for sport investments. Brand new facilities are popping up all over the landscape, and you can't ignore the trend of brand new luxury boxes becoming the norm everywhere. Largely responsible for this is the idea of a sport cartel. Sport cartels are defined as such because they collaborate to restrict the number of teams available, they provide substantial leverage to attain public investments, they restrict inter-team competition for players by controlling the rights of players, drafts, contracts, and trades, and they act in concert to restrict or admit new teams and relocation, in addition to them controlling the broadcast rights. All these things are done to escalate the desire for new teams and the willingness for cities to pay high costs to fund them. Monopoly status also enables a league to negotiate TV contracts that benefit all members of the cartel. The 1961 Sport Broadcast Act allows pro sport teams and leagues to sell their TV rights as a group without being subject to U.S. antitrust laws. As a result, national networks and cable systems might bid for the right to produce and televise the games for any particular league. In a deal struck at the end of 1997, Fox Television paid $17.6 billion for the right to televise NFL games until 2005. This amounts to about $75 million per team per season, a gain of $37 million per team from the previous contract. Momentum is as well facilitated by the community power structure. Essentially, those who control the system often have a vested interest in new facilities, such as banks, real estate agents, hotel restaurant management individuals, construction firms, and the media. The system favors these small, well-organized, homogeneous interests that seek expansion of government activity at the expense of the larger, less organized taxpayers. So the motivation for these interest groups is revenue, and the citizens don't really oppose much because there's a small amount of money. When you're talking about a 1% or a 1-cent sales tax hike, most residents turn their cheek. For the government official, again, highly visible examples of the community moving forward are among the norm in terms of sport facility, parks, malls, etc. More of this momentum is seen because of the increasing cost stimulus associated with these facilities. These provide new revenue opportunities, and economically obsolete stadiums are no longer needed. The Palace at Auburn Hills was among the first revenue-generating venues that showed success. Another prime example is the Staples Center, which houses 4 professional teams in the Lakers, Clippers, Kings, and Sparks. They have luxury suites, club boxes, elaborate concessions, catering, parking, theme activities, and bars. The Staples Center is also notable because about 300 days out of the 365 per year are booked with some event. These are more cost-effective to build new, and there's other benefits that can be derived, such as excitement, interest, the raising of ticket prices, etc. Along with these new stadiums and the cost stimulus is the idea of a honeymoon effect. This is the newness of a stadium that can affect and draw people in for short periods, the spectacle. However, the team needs to be a winner for the stadium to continue to draw. Using data from 1950 to 2002 determined that the attendance honeymoon effect of a new stadium, after separating quality of play effects such as winning percentage, increased attendance by 32 to 37% in the opening year of the new stadium. More momentum concerns have come from the idea of competitive balance. Major league teams have long been concerned with competitive imbalances caused by differences in local markets. The fear is that the absence of salary caps or other regulatory mechanisms, smaller market teams will be unable to remain competitive. In response to this, Major League Baseball recently created a revenue-sharing system that transfers funds from teams with high local revenues to teams with lower local revenues. The notable characteristic of this system is that revenue-sharing payments increase as a team's local revenues diminish. Essentially, competitive balance is the non-competitiveness between teams due to low revenue streams. Teams with fewer sources of revenue simply cannot compete, thereby spawning the need for an increased revenue streams and publicly funded stadiums. There are 3 main areas of goods to consider when we're talking about public subsidies. The first of which is public, meaning all people benefit and the community pays. These benefits, or these public benefits, are perceived by the community as contributing to health, knowledge, safety, or welfare benefits to all community members. The residents' benefit is equitable because they should pay through the tax system. Private, on the other hand, is where the franchise owners pay and the franchise owners benefit. Its benefits accrue exclusively to the franchise owners and the spectators at the game because they're actually watching the event and get to consume the product as it's produced. There are no benefits or profits received by the government or by the general community because it's reasonable to expect that the franchise to pay the entire cost. Therefore, no public subsidy is required. Merit, on the other hand, is a confluence of the two. Franchise owners benefit most because all members of the community benefit somewhat. The franchise owners pay partial cost, as do community members. With regard to the spillover benefits we just mentioned, the primary spillover benefit allegedly is direct economic impact, or the money allegedly received from the funding of a new facility or stadium or the team playing in that area. While that's not the focus of this discussion, we're going to talk about economic impact next week, I still want you to consider this idea as one of the benefits accrued through new facility or stadium construction. Besides just the direct economic impact, there's other spillover benefits as well. Increased community visibility, enhanced community image, stimulation of other development, and psychic income. All of these are the basis for the next couple of slides in today's lecture. Increased public skepticism with the contention that substantial economic returns accrue from public investments does not necessarily mean subsidies should not be forthcoming. Rather, it means that proponents of public subsidies are required to demonstrate that there are alternative sources of spillover benefits to justify them. As well, there are many financial hurdles to overcome, for example, tax laws, justification to the local population, the selling of the project, demonstrating the need for the project, the cost-benefit analysis, the economic studies being largely justified by a reputable firm, overrun costs, and the question of who pays and who benefit. Advocates for stadium construction argue that these stadiums are profit centers for cities based on direct economic impact. However, for example, the average economic impact of the Super Bowl in a host city is allegedly between $300 and $400 million. In reality, though, sport economists have found it to be far less, between $70 and $90 million. We're going to discuss this contentious topic further next week in terms of our economic impact discussion, but for now, consider increased visibility, enhanced community image, stimulation of other development, and psychic income as the primary benefits for the results of subsidy ideas. A professional sport franchise guarantees a significant amount of media coverage for the city in which it is located. It keeps the community's name in front of a national television audience. It creates identity, which is the personal connection and emotional involvement customers have with a team, region, company, etc. There's the state versus city, or the regional examples. For example, Colorado Rockies have the state name in their title, the Florida Marlins as well. Baltimore focuses on the city, and Los Angeles largely on the city. This is done for recruitment of other business and enhance the community's or the city's economic base. Jacksonville provides a really good example of this. Their expansion led to business relocation interest almost immediately. This visibility idea also applies to other media markets, for example, highlighting Florida to the northern folks in the winter. And one of the most prevalent examples is Monday Night Football, when they pan back from commercials and show the skyline and other aspects of the city. Other examples are Todd Blackledge of ESPN has his Taste of the Town, where he goes to a local restaurant and enjoys a meal, and they showcase other parts of the city, such as events and attractions. While sport teams provide a lot of visibility, no more visible examples have been seen lately than the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup. They bring in increased awareness, not just because they highlight a city, but in the case of the World Cup, it highlights the entire country. This increased awareness can lead to promotional campaigns and marketing and tourism commercials. Many cities have continually engaged in what has become known as place marketing, which strives to sell the image of a place so as to make it more attractive to businesses, tourists, and inhabitants. The pervasive popularity of sport in the media has persuaded many cities that sport become a useful vehicle through which to enhance their image. When we say the word image, almost immediately the terms reputation and character spring to mind. This can occur in part from the prestige the city has garnered resulting from hosting major sport events or having a successful team in their town. When you say the terms Barcelona, Atlanta, and Sydney in some way makes you want to go there because the Olympics were there, it provides this image of being a welcoming and open place to visit. However, we talked about the displacement of locals in terms of community and how they would define it. When the Olympics come to town or the FIFA World Cup, it displaces residents, new infrastructure has to be created, largely can be a burden to local folks. However, many government officials want these new stadiums and want these events in their town because it increases the prestige and image of their city. So gaining that new facility, team, or event can raise the level of competency for the city's governments, especially in the population's eyes, and the government will be viewed as symptomatic to the city's economic health. However, what would happen if the city loses the team or loses a bid potentially for the Olympics or the World Cup? That will result in a deflated image of the government and could also be a blow to the local economy. This idea of status is also relatively important to this enhanced community image idea. There is much public sympathy for the adage that no place really can be considered a major league or first-tier city if it does not have a major league sports team. The team is seen as being symptomatic of the city's character and as defining external perceptions of the city. Proponents of public subsidy for facilities frequently frame the issue in these terms: major league city, first-tier city, second-tier city. Well, what makes a city a major league city? Studies have been conducted of the value of having a professional sport franchise using a variety of methodologies. Very few have found the benefits to outweigh the costs, and some have specifically addressed a major league city issue. Is one major league city franchise sufficient to be major league, or two, or three, or four? Are they really necessary to make it a major league city? Well, if it takes four, Los Angeles is not considered a major league city. This seems rather hard to accept, however. If it takes only one, then Green Bay, Wisconsin is a major league city, and that is also hard to accept. More importantly, what exactly are the benefits to the cities of being a major league city, however the term is defined? The academic literature defines a second-tier city more by economic structure rather than size. I quote, "Spatially distinct areas of economic activity where a specialized set of trade-oriented industries takes root and flourishes, establishing employment and population growth trajectories that are envy of many other places, for example Memphis, Nashville, and Charlotte." So while I agree that NBA basketball and NHL hockey provide enjoyment and benefits to fans of all types, those benefits rarely are sufficient to justify millions of dollars for public spending on a new arena. Another spillover benefit is the stimulation of other development. At least part of what cities believe will accrue from their investment in major sports teams includes the contention that a sport event or facility will stimulate additional development and thus contribute to expansion of the city's tax base. However, can a ballpark that operates for 3 hours a day, a few days a week, between May and September, provide substantial economic benefits? Well, this idea of cumulative attraction bolsters this assertion. Here's how it works. This is the engine that drives tourism in many communities. In a simplified tourism model, visitors use some mode of transportation to leave their homes, travel to attractions, which are supported by various kinds of services such as hotels, motels, restaurants, and retailing. The attractions and support services provide information and promote their offerings to target groups that they have identified as potential visitors. Attractions activate this tourism system. Rarely, however, do people leave their homes and travel some distance because they want to stay in a particular hotel or dine at a particular restaurant in a different locale. Most of the time, the desire to go to a destination or pleasure trip is stimulated by its attractions. Therefore, a number of entertainment attractions will do more business if they are located adjacent or in proximity to each other than if they are widely dispersed. To persuade people to go downtown, there must be a threshold level or critical mass of attractions, such as hotels, restaurants, bars, and theaters. This idea of an integrated, coherent downtown master plan has been the impetus for this idea. Leaders must create a broad vision beyond just the ballpark, and the building cannot be the catalyst. It must be built in a sea of commerce. You need to channel fans through corridors of secondary economic activity, cap downtown parking to increase foot traffic, etc. 3 specific developments of component we're going to discuss next: proximate, complementary, and general. Proximate development is where sports facilities are increasingly conceptualized as being part of an integrated redevelopment package that includes substantial proximate development. These facilities do afford urban planners the opportunity to steer their development to a desired location and try to use them to jumpstart economic development. It may take time, and the area must evolve around the new structure. Complementary development comes in 2 forms. Number 1, facilities constructed as part of hosting a mega event, or some facilities exist but others have to be constructed to complement. Number 2, upgrading or initiation of business, which is the most common: restaurants, bars, souvenir stores. This is also called a parasitic relationship. Third, general development. It is sometimes said that the presence of a major league franchise propels economic development. This belief is based on the notion that the big league image will attract general development to the city. Such a positive outcome seems improbable because the publicity of a team does not change any of the costs of the market factors that influence business relocation decisions. Essentially, general development is wishful thinking, the build it and they will come mentality. So is this theory improbable? Largely yes, because the winning image does not change the cost and market factors associated with development and growth. While the preceding examples focus on the tangible aspects of economic activity, psychic income focuses largely on the intangible. Psychic income is the emotional and psychological benefit residents perceive they receive, even though they do not physically attend a sport event and are not involved in organizing them. Sport teams are a medium through which the cities and their residents express their personality, enhance their status, and promote their quality of life to a national audience. In the previous examples of visibility, image, and stimulation, all these factors focus on external audiences with the intent of encouraging the investment in resources in the community. Psychic income, on the other hand, focuses internally and on communities' existing residents. So how do we measure this largely intangible idea of psychic income? And more importantly, how much should teams be subsidized by public funds to compensate for the positive experiences they offer to residents who pay nothing for the experience? Well, economists have a term for this. They call it consumer surplus. This is the surplus benefit that accrues to individuals that is not captured in ticket revenues by the team. Teams produce a service for which some pay nothing, and they seek to identify what people are willing to pay for it. The economic value for natural amenities, on the other hand, such as parks, beaches, wildlife preserves, and habitats, might garner a significant more amount of psychic income than a sport team. However, a direct measure for this type of amenity is called the contingent valuation method, which we won't get into too much in this class, but I just want you to have an idea of what it entails.